Hey everyone, thanks for joining us today. So we'll give it a few minutes, maybe till 4:33, and we'll get started. In the meantime, if you want to introduce yourself on the chat, maybe tell us a bit about where you're located from, what you're up to if you're a student, if you're working. We can have a good conversation going, and then we'll get started with our event in just a bit. Roman, I appreciate you calling in from work. Renewable team at an engineering firm. That's very cool. I think you'll appreciate. We have a bit of a summary of the longer event we ran this past Saturday, and the professor was telling us about some cool technologies for energy optimization. From Nicholas, an environment student from Carleton. Nice. It's good to have students from all different universities in Ontario. Hey, Cami. Okay, so I think we'll get started. Just to give everybody some context, this event is done by Engineers Without Borders, the University of Waterloo, of course with support from National Engineering Month. It was a two-part event, so we ran a much longer event all day on Saturday, in which we had more in-depth speaker talks, and we had students go through a design challenge, and we had some more member learning sessions and all that. And so I believe you should have received an email about that before, but regardless, purpose of today's event is we're gonna be summarizing some information about EWB. We're gonna summarize some information from the talks, go over some of the submissions we had, and announce a winner for those prizes, as well as next steps and kind of how to get involved. And we also have a speaker joining us exclusively just for today. And so with that, I'll hand it off to Nadia, and we'll do our intro.
All right, so welcome everybody to the second event of the SD Green Designathon. We're super glad that you can make it today, and we're really excited to wrap up this designathon. So just to introduce myself, my name is Nadia. I am part of the education portfolio for Engineers Without Borders in the University of Waterloo, and I'm also one of the organizers of this event. And I'd also just like to let the other organizers introduce themselves really quickly.
I'll jump in here. So my name is Hussein, and I'm in between my second and third year of mechanical engineering at University of Waterloo. And I've been with the Engineers Without Borders portfolio for around 2 years here.
Hi, I'm Cami. I'm also part of Engineers Without Borders, the education and engagement portfolio. I'm currently in my first year of mechanical engineering at the University of Waterloo. Nice to meet you all.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nora. I'm in 2A Environmental Engineering, and I'm also part of the education portfolio of Engineers Without Borders.
Hi, everyone. I'm Scarlett. I'm in my second year of geological engineering at Waterloo, and I'm also part of the education portfolio with UW Engineers Without Borders.
All right, nice. Thank you for those introductions. So now we're going to start off this event with a land acknowledgement. The Waterloo, Kitchener, and Cambridge campuses of the University of Waterloo are situated on the Haliman Tract, land that was promised to the Haudenosaunee of the Six Nations of the Grand River, and are within the territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. If you're from outside of the Waterloo region and you want to acknowledge which region and land you're on, you can feel free to follow this link that includes all of the different regions throughout Canada. All right, so we'd like to just welcome everybody again. If you were able to attend the event on Saturday or participate in the Designathon, then welcome back. And if not, then welcome to this event. We received some amazing submissions, so thank you to everybody who participated on Saturday. So I'm just going to go over really quickly what will happen at today's event. And so after this quick introduction and intro to EWB, we'll start off with a presentation from our guest speaker, Calvin Yang, the founder of Canadian Youth Alliance for Climate Action. Then we'll go through a quick summary of what happened during Saturday's event and Designathon for anybody who may have missed it. Next, Hussein will go through the submission showcase to show off all the amazing submissions that we received and award the prizes. And finally, we will end off the day with our closing ceremony. So before we begin, I'm going to do a quick introduction to Engineers Without Borders. So like we mentioned before, Engineers Without Borders is an organization, and our central mission is to bring people and ideas together to tackle the most crucial causes of poverty and inequality. So our vision is to create a world where everybody has access to the opportunities needed to thrive. Our organization consists of different chapters, ventures, fellows, and staff in North America and all across other parts of the world. So these groups come together to invest in social enterprises that can drive impact across communities that really need it the most. We also advocate for policy innovations that address the root causes of poverty and inequality. Finally, we try to develop a community of systems change leaders who can solve the world's most complex problems by all working together. Engineers Without Borders has a broad range of impact, so some of which I've listed on this slide. So as you can see, 66% of EWB ventures have female founders or executive management. We've managed to collect 10,000 signatures and present them to MPs in Ottawa for advocacy initiatives. There are 74 fellows that were embedded across sub-Saharan Africa and Canada. Over 8 million people reached out through social ventures, so we changed a lot of lives. $27.5 million was generated in revenue by EWB Ventures. And finally, we were able to create 203 direct jobs. So now I will pass it off to Cami to introduce our guest speaker.
So yes, today we're lucky to have Mr. Calvin Yang. So Calvin Yang is a founder of Canadian Youth Alliance for Climate Action. So this council and committee is an official member of the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs that focuses on climate change and the effects it has on society. In addition to him being a fan of CYACA, he was also part of the core organizational team for Friday for Future International, the largest climate strike action that happened in New York that led to a domino effect across the world. So let's give a warm welcome to Mr. Calvin Yang.
Thank you, Cami. Thank you, Cami. Hi, guys. Really happy to be here. My name is Calvin. I currently live in New York City, but I am a Toronto native, proud Canadian as well. And yeah, so today I just want to talk about climate change overall, as well as my background in climate activism and how one can get more involved in terms of direct action. So a little about me first. I am the CEO and founder of the Canadian Youth Alliance for Climate Action. We're Canada's first and currently leading youth-led political firm focused on implementing climate policies in our federal government. And we're also nonpartisan. I myself am a young conservative, and we have other people from various political parties, including the Liberals, the NDP, the Greens, and Bloc Québécois on our team. And together we do a lot of direct lobbying, such as implementing more aggressive climate legislations within Parliament, as well as proposing existing legislations to new federal efforts on combating climate change. Furthermore, we are also partnering with Ipsos to bring Canada's first ever Gen Z national environmental poll which we hope to help capture the essence of how our generation feels towards climate change and bring forth political action within the federal government. And in terms of activism that I have done, so I'm really involved in Fridays for Future. I started off organizing in New York. Along with 13 other people, we co-organized the largest climate strike in New York City with 315,000 people. And also I serve on the media team for Fridays for Future USA as well as international, and I help coordinate the media efforts globally in terms of press coverage for Fridays for Future as a movement. And in terms of how I got into climate change, well, I grew up in China, but then I guess one of the major issues of that was that, when I grew up, I believed that climate change wasn't real. I was a climate skeptic. And it wasn't until moving back to Canada when I first single-handedly first saw the impacts of climate change, which not only impacted our First Nations, but also, Canadians across both sides of the country. And that's when I decided that activism is a very good solution to addressing and promoting climate action within our country, because not only will it rally the people together, but will also push for more action on the federal government. So and I guess what I want to also talk about today is also how important climate action is for Canada. As many of you know, climate change is currently creating loads upon loads of impacts within our country, from Atlantic Canada, where storm surges as well as rising sea levels threaten the economic as well as societal foundations of Atlantic Canada, all the way up to our north, where the melting tundra has severely impacted the lives and livelihood of our Inuit and First Nations people. We know that I think all of us here have to realize that climate change is affecting our country deeply, and if we don't do anything, it will bring drastic impacts, and in a foreseeable future. So that's why I guess a call of action from my side is, no matter if you're conservative, if you're liberal, if you're NDP, if you're green, I think the most important thing we have to realize here is that climate change is real. It is a nonpartisan issue, and as Canadians, I think we have this responsibility to push for climate action together. Some ways you can get involved in your local community. So, I mean, when I first started off, I didn't really have that much political experience per se, but I focused a lot on lobbying my local MPs to ask them to endorse or to support existing bills within our parliament. And that is something you can do too. With the election, with a potential election happening this year, and with the pandemic, hopefully, where people can realize the impacts of climate change and take action within our local political community. What you can do is you can find out more about how your local MPs stand on climate action. It's very simple, actually. You can visit openparliament.ca, and they have a list of their past electoral records on a variety of issues, and you can potentially work for MPs if you associate yourselves with their values on the environment. And also you can push for your local MP within the next election to ask them to take a more aggressive stance on climate change. And all these is very, very useful and actually very effective. I mean, we have met with MPs from basically all political parties during our lobbying cycle this year, focused on Bill C-12, the Canadian Net Zero Emissions Accountability Act. And we found that politicians across the aisle, no matter if they're DP, liberal, or conservative, they're really willing to sit down and hear what we have to say. And in some cases, they're even willing to move forth with our legislative amendments. For example, the NDP, I'm glad to announce that they're here to adopt our legislative recommendations on Bill C-12. So never underestimate how much of an impact an individual can have on the political world. And hopefully that's it. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Calvin, for your amazing talk. So if you guys ever want to reach out to Calvin, he's always open to talk about this stuff, and you guys can get involved in CYACA if you reach out to him. He's always looking for new members to join in. So if you guys have any more questions, comments, or concerns right now, you can always ask Calvin. You guys can throw the questions in the chat, and if you guys don't have any, we'll move on.
Thanks, Calvin, for sharing more about COI ACA and about how you got started. I think it's, at least for me, it's a very unique perspective. When we're in school and stuff, when we're taught about how to have an impact for things like climate change, it's mostly through our personal habits, right? Like you're encouraging recycling, um, better consumerism, but we never think of kind of large scale or systemic change, especially, while we're still in school or younger. Um, if you could share a bit about how did you first realize that getting involved politically or with the government would be kind of an effective means for making change? Um, I'd be interested in hearing how that kind of clicked for you at the start.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I mean, since a young age, I've always been really passionate about Canadian politics. I read a lot of the news and publications coming out of the Parliament. So yeah, I feel like since a young age, I've been relatively informed on the political landscape of the country, and that's when I realized that despite our government having issues here and there, overall we are a transparent government, and that is willing to hear the concerns of its citizens. So that's why I guess that's the primary push that pushed me into getting involved in politics to push for concrete climate action. And also, I guess, when I first started off, I didn't realize that how much of an impact it will actually create. But I just told myself, like, why not give it a shot? And then the results are more than surprising on a good side. So that's why, I think that I guess that's my sole inspiration in terms of getting involved in politics to push for climate action.
In addition to that, Calvin, I had a question. And if you wanted to start something similar to CYACA in terms of just creating a little community or council, how easy is it for someone like me, myself, like who has no experience in terms of politics to create a council like this and gather some people and to have a communication and have a talk with members of parliament?
Yeah, for sure. I think, especially when you're starting locally, definitely first start off with find a group of like-minded people like yourself who share a passion towards the environment. Also find people who are share a vision and are willing to work together as a community. And then I think locally, it's relatively easy. I think the first step will be to reaching out to your local EDA, your writing associations, no matter if that's liberal, conservative, NDP, Green, Bloc Québécois. And then talk to them about, first of all, how they feel towards climate change as well as their current climate platform. And from there, I think also you can reach out to your local MP office, call into the constituency office, ask to set up a meeting to talk about a specific aspect of the climate platform. For example, if your current MP is, let's say, voting against Bill C-12, you can set up a meeting with them, tell them how you feel, and this is I have this little community behind me, and this is how we feel collectively as the group of citizens currently living within your writing, and you can go from there. Setting a meeting. I think most MPs are relatively easy to meet. They're also really willing to meet because they're always welcoming the voices of the constituents. So definitely just start off with that. And as your movement or company gets bigger in the process, I think you can reach out to more MPs. And even if you get, for example, lawyers and paralegals to work on your team, then you can start writing your own legislations and work with other NGOs and political firms along the way.
So there's a question in the chat asking, what is this? What is the policy 12 you keep on mentioning? And can you go talk about it a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. So the Bill C-12 is the Canadian Net Zero Emissions Accountability Act. It is, I guess, Trudeau administration's landmark climate bill focused on legally binding Canada to carbon neutrality by 2050. Well, we had quite a bit of concerns with that, not only as like policy wise, but also overall, because the wording is made to be extremely vague, and also there's no legally binding power from the government and to the government to bind the government towards this path of carbon neutrality. So what we did here is basically we rewrote the bill. We added a lot of concrete wording, like Canada must bind itself to carbon neutrality by 2050, or else it will face arbitrary actions from the government. And also we added this aspect of check and balance in place, where the parliament has a lot of say in the government's climate policies. Last but not least, there's an advisory body that's created with the bill that will advise Minister Wilkinson, Jonathan Wilkinson, the current Minister of Environment and Climate Change, on a series of our carbon targets as well as climate efforts. But the problem is that this advisory body does not serve much of a purpose. And also it can be very lopsided in that Minister Wilkinson can fire members on his will, on his pleasure. So that's why we rewrote the bill to make sure that first of all, more power is allocated towards advisory bodies so they can provide a nonpartisan and neutral perspective towards our carbon target. And also, be a good watchdog in that sense to hold the federal government accountable to its words.
Yeah, that's fantastic to hear, Calvin. And we're so grateful to have you here today. And yeah.
Thank you, Cami.
Are there any more questions for Calvin? Give it a few seconds in the chat. Okay, Nicholas has a question. Just give you some time to type it out. So the question is, what is your educational background?
Right. So I'm a high school senior. I'm currently 12th grader. I'm heading off to university this fall.
So with that in mind, does that mean you don't have to be a university student? You don't have to be you don't have to be a professional to be involved in politics. Anyone can get involved.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, that's kind of, exactly. I mean, like, even as a high school student, you can create loads of impact beyond like what you can imagine. So yeah, definitely, even if you're not majoring in environmental science or policy or political science, you can still create loads of impact. And yeah, just believe in yourself. And yeah.
That's great to hear. And
Yeah.
with that in mind,
Cam, you go for it.
Oh no, go ahead, Hussein.
Okay. I was just going to say, I know that's definitely very inspiring. I think it gives a lot of credibility that you're able to accomplish as much and have this much insight. Yeah, thank you again for your time. If anybody has more questions, I guess you'll be around, or they'll be able to contact you either through the CYACA website, which Noura has been sharing links in the chat. I'm sure they can look you up. I think there's a lot of.
Sorry, yeah, if you're interested, give us a follow on Instagram. It's at cyaca.ca. Yeah, give us a follow and stay updated on what we're doing recently. We're going to have a lot of exciting plans coming to the election, especially right now we're focusing on pushing forward a nationwide nonpartisan ad on climate change to bring climate change back onto the forefront of discussion once the election's triggered. So yeah, feel free to follow us.
Awesome. Yeah, I think there's a lot of connections between this and the advocacy portfolio we have at EWB. So recently we had done a campaign to increase Canada's total spending in terms of percentage of its GDP that goes to international development, which was successful. It just raised to 1.8%. I think there's lots of connections between what we're talking about, and I think especially in particular for green building. Knowing how much of an impact it does have towards carbon dioxide emissions and climate change, kind of outside of the political landscape, but using our role as citizens or in corporations to kind of help adopt some of the practices we'll be covering the next half of this meeting. I think that can be very impactful as well. And just some comments in the chat for you, Calvin. Keep it up. I'm trying to put something together to support the homeless from Pratham and from Scarlett. Incredible to hear more about the impacts you've made. Thank you for sharing.
And with that in mind, it will lead into what we did the past 2 days in our design-a-thon, where we talked about where we had different case studies and where it goes into the effects of climate change and how these different case studies have effect on climate change and towards green building, and how we ask students and professionals on how they will provide a solution on how to deter from these effects of these case studies. So if Hussein wants to go ahead and talk about the different design days we had and the talk speakers we had during the day about the design-a-thon.
Yeah. So we had three main kind of speakers and topics we're looking at on the Saturday, and we'll do our best to kind of condense it here. Each of our speakers was on for about 45 minutes. And so our first talk was from Professor Andrea Atkins. She's a professor at the University of Waterloo, and she was talking about building on a planet on fire, in the sense that buildings, often the contributions towards climate change, of buildings is overlooked, and kind of what are some easy strategies and kind of the low hanging fruit that we could all incorporate to make impact towards this. We had some advice and kind of a good career talk from Carson Erdman. He's an engineer in training at Smith & Anderson and working as a mechanical designer. And so he's just recently graduated, like approximately 2-3 years ago, doing a bachelor's in mechanical engineering. And so he gave us some insight about how to get started in this field. And then I did a quick presentation more about what EWB does and an example of our member learning sessions. And so the topic was Canadian broadband access. After this, we introduced 3 case studies. So our case studies were 1 on pavement infrastructure, 2 on wood waste, and 3 the implications for artificial intelligence in building management systems, so AI and BMS. And we had students participate in kind of ideating a quick solution, finding where the implications are with the sustainable development goals, more than at a surface level, kind of really looking into what those goals are asking and requiring, and putting it together in a format that's easily accessible and readable by everyone. So in terms of the first talk, I think the main takeaway, other than just a staggering, I think it was almost like 40% or something of emissions are building related, or either in the use or operations of buildings, other than some of those staggering numbers Professor presented. She was talking about easy solutions that can be incorporated in existing buildings, new buildings, and even in some of our home projects. So based on fundamentals of green building design and LEED, as well as just optimizing energy loss or energy usage is the biggest contributor in terms of carbon dioxide emissions from buildings. And so she was talking about passive design solutions. And by passive design, it means things that in the building envelope. So as part of the kind of whole the perimeter of the building that can prevent heat loss or energy loss, which in turn prevents you from having to create more of it or to heat up more of a room, for example. And so some examples were daylighting. And so having, for example, high up windows in a place so you can have good light penetration into the room reduces the need for having more like incandescent or LED lights, so it reduces your electricity usage that way. And also lots of times when daylighting is completed, there's lots of simulations that are done based on where the building is located to see where the sun sets and rises and sets, to kind of optimize the orientation of your building to get the maximum amount of energy coming in from the sun. Energy from the sun is energy that you don't have to generate and energy you don't have to use in there. Another passive design is shading devices to reduce space cooling demands. So she was talking about how in modern architecture, big kind of open fields, open spaces are highly preferred because they're aesthetic, but this is kind of contrary to everything. This is contrary to green building practices because you're essentially just heating up a space that would then, so this is kind of the opposite of the first one, you're heating up a space that would then need to be cooled. And so some kind of suggestions for this is to incorporate more horizontal shades And so this allows you to reduce sunlight in hot months, but it allows it to enter in cool months. Vertical fins, reducing sunlight and glare into the east and west facing windows, and adding plants, and so they can block the sun in the hot months, and so give you some shade. But then in the winter, when it gets cold, shed their leaves, and you get more sun in the cooler months, which is what you want. In terms of thermal, in terms of things you can do to reduce heat loss from your building envelope, there's kind of various materials you can use depending on your climate. So if you have internal exposed concrete, stone, or masonry, you can absorb excess heat from solar gains through the day, and this will kind of radiate it into the room throughout the night, which will offset the overheating you get during the day, the need for heating at night. So it's kind of like using the energy that you get from the sun during the day, basically using it as a heat sink, storing it in your masonry and stone. That kind of stays there while the sun is still emitting energy, but at night, when it gets colder, it radiates it out. And then the opposite is kind of applied when you want to have, so if you have external exposed concrete masonry, you're absorbing excess heat from solar gains throughout the day, so it doesn't enter the building, and then you can release it into the interior. And so these are just kind of different methods of, depending on when what your climate is. And the last one is natural ventilation. So air, like warm air, will always rise up. And so if you can draw warm air upwards into an elevated space, you can pull fresh air into the building just through like natural convection. And then cross ventilation. This is something I think we all apply. You're cooking something, and you're trying to get some fresh air into the house. And so you open up 2 windows on either ends, get wind blowing, a lot more effective than just having one thing open. Yeah, so all of these slides, she goes into a lot more detail and kind of really goes into how impactful these practices can be. We don't have the time to cover it during this meeting. And so I think we'll link our event resources, which basically has a link to our slides where you can get all of the sources, you can get all of the information, you can really go into the detail if you're interested. We'll just put that link in the chat in the next few minutes. So that was for our talk from Professor Andrea Atkins. And then we had Carson Erdman come in, and he was talking about his career, but more specifically, he was talking about like as an engineering student, as a business student, or environmental student, either a student or even a professional, just along with themes of lifelong learning. If you're looking to get into the field or to kind of advance your skills, what are the things that they're looking for right now? For example, at Smith & Anderson. And so he said it's really a combination from having a technical background in terms of understanding mechanical building systems, so HVAC, plumbing, fire protection. This gives you a good context when you're looking at what's more recently being done is like software optimizations and implementations. It gives you a good technical background as to what you're actually doing when you're making your software designs or calculations analysis. In terms of specific programs he's recommending to learn, he said the programs that are most in demand right now were Revit, AutoCAD, and different energy modeling softwares. And I think some of this you would have access to either as you Waterloo, Ottawa, Carleton. You'd have access through your universities, or if you're working in the field right now, then potentially you have access to it through your firm. He said these are kind of the things that, at least at Smith & Anderson, they're a consulting firm for building design. This is kind of what they look for. Yeah. Okay. And so, as I said, I want to highlight some of the submissions we got. So our case studies were pavement infrastructure, wood waste, and the use of artificial intelligence and BMS in building management systems. I can kind of summarize them quickly. And so for pavement infrastructure, we're looking at solutions, or the problem we're looking at is that like roads are often unmaintained, especially in remote areas, and this can lead to lots of damage to cars, to property, to transport, just in general economically. And often it's where a climate has a big role in these roads deteriorating. So like number one, the climate. Number two, they're just not monitored because this would happen more in remote areas. In terms of wood waste, we're looking at the conception that people have that wood is recyclable, wood is an environmentally friendly material. And so if it's thrown in the garbage or if it's, it can be recycled, right? So it's fine how much we use. But I think almost 20% of the waste from wood will end up in a landfill. And so it's kind of looking at ways that we can change education and perception, and also kind of use engineering to be able to repurpose this and provide value to this wood waste. And then for artificial intelligence and BMS, we're looking at what are the gaps right now in building management systems. So they collect information, for example, about your HVAC, your plumbing, electrical, etc. What more information would it need for an artificial intelligence system to really be able to optimize and provide additional value versus what's already there? So wherever this has been implemented, there's been significant reductions in energy bills because it's able to use historical data, it's able to analyze where people are in the building, what things are being used, and have a much more customized approach to managing your resources in a building versus a person controlling it or having set parameters from before. And so we had a few submissions. And so for the people who allowed us to share their designs, thank you very much. We'll be going through 3 of them just at a high level, just to give you an example of what people worked on, because I know our participants spent a good amount of time on this. And so we want to showcase their efforts. And so our first example is from James Campen and Prashar. And they were looking into the first case study, pavement infrastructure. And so if your submission comes up here, feel free to elaborate in the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself, you don't have to. I basically summarize them into 1 sentence. So they were looking more into the problem background and finding some statistics or data. I think what really stood out to me, so the poll found Canadians faced an estimated $1 billion in pothole-related damage to their vehicles each year. And so it shows that there's kind of, just in Canada alone, there's huge economic incentive to solving this problem. And there's very good analysis into the SDGs. And essentially, the solution was to mobilize individuals to review traveled roads and kind of centralize this response and give these reviews to the appropriate municipalities and administrative bodies. And so, spending money on some remote, on some monitoring system to see where there are problems. People are driving on these roads anyways. So how can you best utilize them to get this information so that you know where you need to fix things or where there's damage. Our second example I want to highlight is from Hamdar. And so this was very interesting. So she was they were looking into the wood waste case study, and I found the approach taken here to be very interesting. And so it wasn't necessarily a product-based approach or a specific technology-based approach, but it was more of a kind of systemic policy standard and education change through the application of what's required through some of the sustainable development goals. And there's kind of a plan outlined there for that. Again, for our showcase, we'll link these in the event resources. I just shared the link again. And just so if you're kind of curious to see what people came up with, you can go into more of the details there on your own time. And then the last submission we want to showcase was by Dennis Lee and Kevin Ma. And so they were looking into, basically to summarize their solution, they were looking into utilizing existing infrastructure and computer vision to better analyze where there's a kind of gaps and poor road conditions using, for example, CCTV or red light cameras. And so this was an interesting example, kind of not on the kind of systemic change side, but how to use existing infrastructure and technology, specifically software, to find where there are problems and kind of have an automated approach to dealing with these. Yeah, I know there's I know there's a good mix of students and professionals in the group. And so I'm hoping afterwards, if you have the chance to connect, if you think that this is something that your company is working on, you're interested in working on, hopefully you're able to kind of connect with each other and learn some more about kind of what research was done, what the solutions entailed, maybe provide some feedback or some mentorship if you can, if you're a professional, and kind of share your thoughts and ask questions if you're a student. And so we'll try to have some time for that at the end. And so I think this is what most people have been waiting for. We want to announce who the winners were for our submission. And so if I can get everybody to unmute, make a lot of noise, spam the chat, drum roll, give us a good reaction. I think there's reactions you can do on Zoom.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. All right.
Let's do a drum roll or something. Let's go.
So congratulations, Dennis and Kevin. The prize we'll be giving out is vouchers to write the lead Green Associate exam. And we'll be providing the training materials for those as well. We had really great submissions all around. This was it was a very tough choice for us, but we're hoping to kind of stay in touch with everybody who participated and see where we can help in terms of career goals and things like that. And so I think a lot of us here, especially if you were there on Saturday, are familiar with LEAD, but just to summarize, it's a, Dennis, I spit out my noodles. Good. LEAD is leadership and energy and environmental design. And so why is it useful to have this credential? So the LEAD Green Associate is basically like your entry-level credential into this, but it's very useful because it's an industry standard. I know, so these students are from the University of Waterloo. And I know for us, at least for our co-op positions, it's often required or preferred. I'll specifically mention this credential. And so it's a good experience to be able to diversify your experience and help you see how like these concepts related to green building are applied in industry. And like I've done the studying and the exam before, and I found it more than the actual framework. I found it to be very good in terms of kind of having a standard to evaluate different kinds of solutions and see particularly where they apply, what are the most needed cause areas. Yeah, and so Dennis and Kevin, once again, congratulations. And so we'll be getting in touch with you afterwards for the details for this. And thank you again for all the participants and your submissions. In terms of next steps and closing, so at this point, I want to open it up to questions, thoughts. Feel free to unmute yourself. Really the main takeaways we had from our Saturday event and from today is to really look at the sustainable development goals at a deeper level and see how the specific policies, frameworks, and goals there can help you to provide a solid background if you're trying to advocate for change, either politically, as Calvin was talking about, even if it's in a workplace, like for example, a corporate social responsibility team, it's on your co-op, or even in, for example, personal projects. Like if you're looking to implement passive design, how does this kind of contribute towards a greater goal? And so we want to encourage you to look into that. This is a question from Maha. Can you share the project details? Yeah, so we'll add them. So for the people who gave permission to share, the event resources link right after this is over, right after 5:30, we'll add all those links in. You should already be able to access the larger keynotes from our speakers through there. But yeah, just after this, we'll add the details of the winner projects. And for everybody who submitted, we want to get back to you with some feedback. We value that you put in a lot of time working on the project, and we want to kind of give you some feedback, just so you get some value out of it as well. Yeah, thanks, Mala, for your question. That was basically exactly my next point here. So access to design day presentations through event resources, and speaker contact will be available through all the slides. For those of you, actually for everyone here, whether you're in school or if you're a professional, highly endorse staying connected with Engineers Without Borders at the University of Waterloo chapter or a local chapter. And so there's chapters, Carleton has a huge chapter actually. There's chapters at Carleton, Toronto, Ryerson, Waterloo, even across the province. And for professionals, if you're in engineering or in business, there's professional chapters as well. Like for example, with our PEO that are doing some really interesting work as well. All our contact information is on the bottom. And so as we wait for questions, comments, or anything like that, I'm going to launch a poll. This just helps to give both EWB and the NEM team some feedback about how this event went and how we can improve the next time. So it should just be 3 questions. And I'm going to launch that now. If you can take some time to fill it out, that would be awesome. So in addition, National Engineering Month was very kind in having lots of amazing sponsors for not just this event, but all the events they've been running. We definitely wouldn't have been able to put this together without support from them through every stage financially, and they'd also be giving us lots of advice in terms of how to run a good event and getting a bunch of participants for us. And so these are all the organizations they've been working with. And so we're really, really grateful and thankful for them. And also organizations or speakers are representing. So from the University of Waterloo, Smith & Anderson and Footprint, and CYACA. We just want to give a huge round of applause and thanks there. Okay, there's a question from Nicholas. What do you all think would be the most important change to our current society to tackle climate change? Just looking to hear different thoughts, or just environmental remediation in general. Yeah, that's a really good question. I want to, let's see if we can open this up, have a bit of a discussion going. If anybody wants to reply on the chat, I'll read that out loud, or if you want to just unmute, it'd be great to have a bit of a discussion. So just to repeat, the question is, what would be the most important change to our current society to tackle climate change? So Noura put in the chat, valuing environmental protection greater than profit. Correct me if that's not what you're trying to say. I think that is.
I can like elaborate on the point that I made. I think that like for a lot of development projects, for example, so like pipelines, like those are projects that bring in a lot of money, but if you think about how much more greenhouse gas that puts into the environment, it's like, well, is it worth it in the long run to be, still building or expanding pipelines if we're trying to reduce our emissions? So I feel like when we value profit over protecting the environment, or when we eventually value protecting the environment over profit, that could help like lead us in the right direction.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's really valid. Nicholas replied saying immediate profit. And so kind of getting at how environmental policy really bolsters future economies. Comment from Fathom saying, to be honest, it's a mindset change. Do the harder thing instead of the easy one because it matters. I think, yeah, these are all really good perspectives, really good points. I think specifically, Nicholas, for your question, what do you think the most important change to our current society would be to tackle climate change? I think just looking at some of the statistics that Professor Andrea provided about how much like the ongoing operations of buildings is costing in terms of carbon dioxide emissions, I think that has a huge impact, as well as animal farming and kind of just how much emissions are how much emissions there are through the production of meat. The comment from saying, working on environmental racism and helping out marginalized communities who are getting affected with climate change the most. Yeah, that's a really good point. I think that's very much in line with the AWB mission, is trying to really tackle the most crucial causes of poverty and inequality. And so it's looking at not just kind of low-hanging fruit, but like people who are suffering the most and people who are affected the most, and like how can we go about having not band-aid solutions, but more of a systemic change or lasting impact in those areas. I think a really important addition is like, if you want to help out marginalized communities who are getting affected with climate change the most, but also find ways to kind of give representatives from those communities a voice. And so, you know, you're giving a hand up as well as, or it's like giving a hand up instead of a handout, in a sense. And Nora, I think the comment you had about like profit versus environmental protection, I think one of the main kind of pillars for like green policy and LEAD in general is like having a kind of like a triple bottom line. So you have people, profit, and planet. And so valuing planet and people just the same as you would value profit. I think that's one of the fundamental principles that kind of the rest of the framework is built around. I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, I really love all the energy in the chat. Thanks, Nicholas. Thanks, Pratham. Thanks, Dennis. Yeah, so at this point, if you have any more questions or you just want to hang out for the discussion, we'll be on for a few minutes still. If not, feel free to screenshot this and make sure you get down the link for the event resources, which I'll share again for the last time, just to make sure everybody has it. This is really like our central where you can find all the information, where you can find all the speaker notes, and there's a request to share the submissions. And so we'll put them on there. So make sure you have a copy of that. And if you're interested with getting in touch with our chapter, in particular for Engineers Without Borders, or even if you want us to connect you with another chapter, we're happy to do that. And so all of our contact information is down below. Thank you everyone for coming out. We really appreciate your time. And thank you to all our participants as well. Is there any in the Windsor area? That's a very good question. Give me 5 seconds and I can, a bit more than 5 seconds, but I can find out. 1 sec.
Yes, there is. The University of Windsor has an EWB chapter.
Okay.
If you're interested to join, we could reach you out and connect you with the University of Windsor chapter.
Yeah, definitely. So Maha, I'll make a note and connect you with a representative from there. So there's a question from Danielle saying, just out of curiosity, can you touch upon the third case study topic, BMS and AI? I missed the first session, so I'm curious what was done for that topic. Yeah, I'm happy to. So let me pull over to actually the slides that we did for our Saturday. We didn't have any submissions for this, but I can definitely talk a bit more about the case study. Okay, let me go back into present mode. I'll just pull up something here. Three minutes ago. Yeah, just give me 1 second. I'm just pulling up my notes. Okay. So basically, just at like a high level, what we were looking at, with this case study. So BMS is a system that basically collects, like it's similar to like a PLC, I guess, in a manufacturing setting, collects different parameters from the building, and are used for basically automation, management, and control of the building subsystems. So these would be things like the water pressure, like heaters, boilers, electrical, etc. And so right now, basically, they collect all these parameters. Some of them can be programmed to keep them at certain levels or to do things in case like there's an exceedance. And so what we're talking about for AI-enabled BMS solutions is that they have the potential to more than just collect data and act based on logic from before. They can actually regulate and they can control functions to meet optimal comfort and resource utilization targets. So for example, if you know right now there's nobody in this room, if a computer can detect that, you turn off the heating there, there's lots of savings. So it's often used for energy management, and implementation has resulted in much lower energy bills. An interesting kind of implementation of this that our source here, again, you'll find this in our event resources. The source here talks about its implementation in places where there's high risk, things like places like nuclear reactors, hydroelectric dams, where often you don't have time for a human to make a decision before something goes wrong very fast. And so how can you kind of program to make a decision based on your building parameters to prevent catastrophe, for example? So that was one aspect. And the other aspect was energy savings. I think we're very much pushing the time. I'd really like to talk about this more. And so please feel free to contact, and I'd love to continue the discussion. But at this point, I'm going to stop the screen share and end the call. Thank you again for your time, and hope to stay in touch with everyone here. Have a good day.